We light our chalice flame today on this first Sunday of 2021, as chalice flames are lit in our brother and sister congregations across the world. And as we do so, we will hear words from the Reverend Lisa Doeg, minister to the Nora Unitarian Universalist Church at Hanska, Minnesota. For the new year, just days old. Beginning today, always beginning. We light our chalice, symbol of faith, perseverance, and hope, in astonished thanksgiving and irrepressible praise. For beginnings that emerge out of endings, appear amidst continuity, become visible in hindsight. We light our chalice, symbol of faith, perseverance, and hope, in astonished thanksgiving and irrepressible praise, for all the times and all the ways we have begun anew together. We light our chalice, symbol of faith, perseverance, and hope. Welcome. Welcome on this, the third day of January. I wish you warm hope for 2021, a change for the better, a safe progression to a new way of living. However, the uncertainties of the way forward are always a step away. We are right now actually still in the Christmas period. The 12 days of Christmas are the part in where we sit at the moment. 10 lords are leaping, if you really follow your 12 days of Christmas properly. Now, in the traditional Christian calendar, the 12 days of Christmas are the time of the journey of the three wise men, the kings, the Magi, however you wish to describe them, on their path from a foreign land to visit the Christ child in Bethlehem. Many of you will be aware of the story. It only appears once in the Bible. Very little is known about it, but it's become a part of the Christmas story in such a large way. No nativity is correct without it there. This idea, the travelling dignitaries coming to witness the Christ child. And all of you in Kent will probably be aware of our three kings made so wonderfully by Susan here in Sevenoaks, who do travel around with me in this first service in January, has done every year for some time now. And this year, of course, no exception. So our kings are here. So on this cusp of a new year, a time of joining of the past and of the future, but being aware of the present too. I welcome you to this service today. This time and this space are yours. I bid you welcome. Our first hymn today has words by Lena Baxter, or Lena Cockcroft as she is now known. A hymn remembering the importance of love, of peace, of hope in our lives. Bring flowers to our altar. The words will be on your screen. Our first reading today is by feminist theologian Nicola Slee. This is from a wonderful book called Sabbath, published in 2019, containing thoughts and prayers and stories and meditations on the need to pause, to breathe, to find harmony and regeneration. Now, this is an ordinary life, and I'm very grateful to Nicola for her permission to share her work. I want to wash dishes for a year, peel potatoes, make pies and cakes, kneel in the earth and pull weeds, take time to pray, to read, to give myself to poems. Who made this crazy life anyway, of scrabbling and pushing and sweating as you tread a high wire between mountains, not knowing when you'll fall, legs freewheeling in midair? You did. Nobody but you, and nobody else can unmake it. The words of Nicola Slee. Let us come together in a time of stillness and of prayer. O Spirit of life, unseen, untouchable, whose being is yet assured, may your presence connect us. May our connections help us to be what we have within us to become, and to do what is within us to accomplish. May our minds be clear and sharp, so that we can reflect on what we hear, so that we can consider that world as it is. May we be encouraged to be thoughtful in our decisions, to be courageous in our resolutions, to be honest in our promises. May we be reminded that though life is stressful and casts upon us many burdens, the daily minor victories are as valuable as gold. May we be taught that to step forward, we have to be patient with ourselves, with our fellows, with the complexity of modern living. May we know in our hearts a desire for growth, to absorb wisdom, to be calmer, to be more generous, to be more giving. May we find strength to overcome the anger which deadens the heart and turns us away from the gladness of living. May we be mindful of the need to live in the present, to learn what we can from the past, and to be positive about the future. If you wish to, I welcome you to join with me in the words of the last prayer, following the words on your screen. Eternal Spirit, may we be led from death to life, from falsehood to truth. May we be led from despair to hope, from fear to trust. May we be led from hate to love, from war to peace. Let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. Amen. Our second reading is a poem by T.S. Eliot. I mentioned earlier that these 12 days of Christmas, of which we're in the 10th, these days after Christmas Day, are often used to reflect on the journey of the wise ones to the stable in Bethlehem. It's a very short biblical story. It only appears in the book of Matthew, but it's taken on a life of its own in our lives, in our memories, in prose and in poetry. Now, this particular piece, The Journey of the Magi, is from the perspective of one of the wise ones, a magus, I guess. And it's looking back and telling us the story as if long ago, and the lessons that may have been learned upon it. It will be read not by me, but it's a very famous reading by Sir Alec Guinness.
A cold coming we had of it, just the worst time of the year for a journey, and such a long journey. The ways deep and the weather sharp, the very dead of winter. And the camels, galled, sore-footed, refractory, lying down in the melting snow. There were times we regretted the summer palaces on slopes, the terraces, and the silken girls bringing sherbet. Then the camel-men cursing and grumbling and running away, and wanting their liquor and women, and the night fires going out, and the lack of shelters, and the cities hostile and the towns unfriendly, and the villages dirty and charging high prices. A hard time we had of it. At the end we preferred to travel all night, sleeping in snatches, with the voices singing in our ears saying that this was all folly. Then at dawn we came down to a temperate valley, wet, below the snow line, smelling of vegetation, with a running stream and a water-mill beating the darkness, and 3 trees on the low sky, and an old white horse galloped away in the meadow. Then we came to a tavern with vine leaves over the lintel, 6 hands at an open door dicing for pieces of silver, and feet kicking the empty wineskins. But there was no information. And so we continued and arrived at evening, not a moment too soon, finding the place. It was, you may say, satisfactory. All this was a long time ago, I remember, and I would do it again, but set down this. Where we led all that way for birth or death. There was a birth, certainly. We had evidence and no doubt. I had seen birth and death, but had thought they were different. This birth was hard and bitter agony for us, like death, our death. We returned to our places, these kingdoms, but no longer at ease here, in the old dispensation, with an alien people clutching their gods. I should be glad of another death.
The tales of travellers are stories of our own lives too. We are all travellers on a journey. For our second hymn, the words by Andrew Hill will be on your screen. We are travellers on a journey.
When primal stars
Merry Christmas. Happy 10th day of Christmas. We are in a new year, yet we're not yet free of the past, nor are we present in the future. We are travellers on this journey, even now. Now, I've mentioned the wise ones already today, those mysterious figures from the biblical story of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. Now, they appear in only one of the four gospel stories, which is unusual. They're in Matthew, which is the second gospel. And it's the story of the visit of the wise men to Bethlehem, a staple part of any self-respecting school nativity, and it's usually muddled through with visits of the shepherds and others on the night of the birth. Yet the school nativity is a conflation of nativity events drawn from all sorts of different sources. And Matthew's story, the story that the kings appear in, has no stable. There is no innkeeper. There are no shepherds. The wise men, or the Magi, or perhaps even astrologers, are the only visitors to the newborn baby. Now, they come from the east, following a star, although at the time this was written, according to John Barton, who wrote the Oxford Bible Commentary, stars and angels were often considered to be the same thing. It's an understandable assumption. So perhaps the story talks of an angel leading them to the place of birth. And on arrival at Jerusalem, they ask where the newborn King of the Jews might be found. Now the ruler of the area, Herod, hears of these questions and asks his advisors for more details. And the advisors tell of a prophecy by Micah. Micah was a Jewish prophet. He has his story in the Hebrew Bible. And Micah told of a new saviour to be born to the people of Israel and to be born in the town of Bethlehem. And Herod, fearing a challenge to his authority from this birth, advises the wise ones to head to that town and then asks them to report back so that he might, as it says, pay homage to him too. Now the wise ones make it to Bethlehem. They see the baby Jesus with his mother Mary. They present the gifts, and yes, the gold, frankincense and myrrh are all in the biblical story. And then, recognizing the double-crossing Herod probably has a different idea in store, they head back by a different route altogether, not via Jerusalem. And that's it. We know nothing more about them. We can assume they were not Jews, because they came from outside, and there's this assumption that the story is aligned to reminding people that Jesus was born for everybody, not just the Jews. So they're not Jewish, they're from outside, but they come to this stable where a Jewish mother and her baby are there. And they're considered important, they're considered wealthy. And a more precise location of their home is never given. We don't know their names, we don't even know if there were three of them. The original text doesn't say so, that's just something that's come up over the time. And it's a great story. And like many such stories, the literal truth is irrelevant. As Unitarians, we can dig underneath that. We can look for the meaning that that story might bring. And it brings an understanding to spiritual journeys. It's a story that underlines action over assumption. It's a story that might be applied to our own lives as we reflect or we struggle with the past, where we might be at the present, or where we are headed to in the future. Now, the T.S. Eliot poem that we heard earlier, read for us so well today by Sir Alec Guinness, brings a different, more personal slant to the story. And it's written from the perspective of one of the wise ones. It's an autobiographical history that tells a more detailed impact of the story. It's set in the depths of winter, perhaps a European rather than an Eastern Christmas time. We hear a rather grumpy view of how the Magi look back fondly on the lives they have left behind to make this journey. The summer palaces, the silken girls bringing sherbet. The narrator remembers a time in his life where worries seemed far away. A privileged life that was perhaps not appreciated for what it truly was. And it's a trap we all fall into at times, surely. But now he travels. But only part of this new journey is something that he's chosen to do. They travel, the three of them, I think there are three mentioned in the journey. He travels at the mercy of the rogue-like camel guides, through hostile cities and towns, with all their previous liberties curtailed. This is hard, and it's expensive, and it's restrictive, and it's frightening. What's become of the life before? Where on earth will this new journey take them? And having set off on this path, perhaps willingly at first, they find it is very, very difficult. They have little control. They're being led rather than being allowed to find their own path. Then there is respite. They arrive at a better place. The temperature is higher. Vegetation is there. It's still not perfect. Unhelpful people at the taverns. No real information on what is going on. And then they meet promise. It's nothing earth-shattering, though. It's almost run-of-the-mill. It's on reflection that it's spotted. In the words of the old man looking back in the reading we had, the place they found, the conclusion of this journey, or this stage of the journey, was simply satisfactory. And then off once more. The journey never truly ends, but buoyed by the discovery of hope, one assumes, they take a different path. They're returning to their palaces once more, but they know it will never be the same as before. The narrator talks of the birth and of death, of new beginnings, but of endings too. The journey has been tortuous, and the return is welcome. But things will never be the same. Now, the analogy with our progression of our own lives in 2020 is all too obvious, and I'm not going to labour the point in this address at all. We began, or most of us began, last year in a better place than we find ourselves now. I'm not going to suggest all our lives were lived in gilded summer palaces, but the notion that we were somewhere more safe, more familiar, more of our own choosing, will be the case for many, if not most. Yet we were often unaware of our good fortune, perhaps unappreciative at times. Things were often good, but we may not have always realised how good. Now, of course, the seismic changes to everything, every aspect of our lives, for just about everyone around the world as a result of the pandemic, has been an uncertain, a treacherous, and unsettling time, and for many, a truly tragic time. Our journey, not self-made, nor guided by us, has been difficult. We've been at the mercy of others, and we have grumbled too, just as our Magi does, or our Magus does in our reading. Yet we're starting to see our own temperate valley. Not necessarily quite at the stable yet, but the promise of something better lies ahead. Still surrounded by uncertainty, the inhospitable taverns and unhelpful villagers, but we know we're nearly there. And soon, we hope, we pray, we'll be heading back in some way to our own summer palaces of sorts. Now, so far, all so obvious perhaps. Yet I reflect particularly now on the stories of life and death we are facing. Of course, many of us hope to return to something more like the life we had before COVID. Many more will be looking to return to something better than the life before COVID. We did not all live gilded lives, just perhaps better ones than now. Yet T.S. Eliot's Magus tells us of the death of the old ways, of new birth, despite it being seen at first as a return. The journey is instead on a different road, with the experiences of the past alongside us, but the need for something new. Now we are, each of us, a wise one. The blank faces on our models here give you the opportunity to place yourself in their shoes. So how do we build the place we're returning to? We will all have elements of the last 9-10 months that we wish to expunge from our lives. Yet we will have elements too, learned on the journey, that we'll wish to take with us. Like the wise ones returning to home, there is a death and there is a birth. Elements of new life that we might wish to bring with us to make our return a more positive experience. Our first reading, Nicola Slee's Hope for an Ordinary Life, calls for a life more simple. Now, it was written before 2020, when life was more frenetic for most of us in a bewildering number of ways. But Nicola Slee calls for a year of washing dishes, of making cakes, of gardening, of praying, of reading and giving herself to poetry. Be careful what you wish for, as some might say. Yet, although we are not wealthy kings from the East, there were these thinking further, these for some, certainly for me, some of those bright moments of the last year. Washing dishes, making cakes, reading. Yet I know I didn't make the most of them. I still spent too much time scrabbling and pushing too much into the time I had. But when I think back, I know these rare moments of calm, of connection, were important. And I want them to take them with me on my journey back. Connection to others has been surprisingly stronger too. Zoom, regular phone calls, emails, texts, not as much as perhaps I'd hoped, but more than before. It's a new birth of something, something to grow, to nurture. And seeing true compassion and care at work around us, the inspirational lessons that we get from the NHS or care workers or neighbours or simply helpful strangers. A new world has been born and can continue if we're determined to support its growth and development. Now, it's unusual at the start of a new year to say that we long to return to an ordinary life, a life safer, a life more settled. Our ordinary lives in our relative summer palaces will not be the same as before, nor will they be the same as each other. They will all be different. But it's up to us to help determine whether that difference recognises not just the death of the old ways, but the birth we witnessed on the journey too. As Nicola Slee asked in that first reading, who made this crazy life? The answer, of course, as she says, is you did. Nobody but you. Let's build the hopes for the future on the good in the ordinary we have found in adversity. No longer at ease in the old ways. Let us travel together to a return more brighter. Merry Christmas, and hopes for a happy, but perhaps ordinary, New Year. Let us come now to a time of stillness and silence. As we settle our bodies, Perhaps closing our eyes, focusing on our breath. I shall speak some words, and I shall strike the singing bowl, and then we'll come together in a time of stillness and reflection. That stillness will be broken by music to continue those reflections. As we settle our bodies, as we use this time today, at this time of a journey, to reflect on the things that we have learned over the last 9 months, the things we wish to preserve, to take with us to our new destination. Some closing words. Let us go in the spirit of love, never knowing when or where we may find the divine, yet conscious of the spark within each of us and the unfolding beauty that surrounds us. Let us go in peace. Let us go in love. May our lives be a blessing.